Namaste and welcome everyone. We would like to begin with a short invocation, a chant. We have Richard with us already, so welcome Richard.
Thank you.
Please join me everyone if you like. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So this chant reminds us of the essential nature of all of us, that of wholeness, wholeness within and wholeness in the universe. So with that, I would like to again welcome Richard and all the participants. Just to briefly introduce Anadi Foundation and the co-founders who are also with us here today, Smriti ji and Adi ji. They both have been software engineers trained in the US and Italy and were professors of engineering at a university in South India. And more recently, they quit their job and started Anadi Foundation to revive Indian knowledge systems and traditional wisdom. And they've been doing some wonderful work at an ashram near Coimbatore, applying traditional knowledge in the field of healthcare, education, rural livelihoods, and environmental sustainability. And I would like to now also introduce our guest speaker. Just sharing my screen. Give me a moment. So just sharing, we all know in the invitation, Dr. Richard Davidson is a professor of psychology and psychiatry and he's the founding director of Center for Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Has written several books, several articles. His research focuses on neurology of emotion and emotional styles. He has also published a book called The Emotional Life of Your Brain, and co-authored another book called Altered Traits with Daniel Goleman. He is also elected on the National Academy of Medicine in 2017 and was appointed on the governing board of UNESCO's Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. But moreover, I would just like to share that I have been really fortunate to receive his mentorship guidance over past 2 years in a small group of us on compassionate leadership. And Richard is someone who really embodies compassion, kindness, empathy, all the things that he has been researching about. He is someone who is really living those values and draws from Buddhist practices as well, if I may add, a very humble and wise presence. So we are really truly honored to have you with us, Richard. Thank you for sparing your precious time. And I hand over to Smriti ji to moderate today's session.
Thank you so much, Vipul.
Namaste, Dr. Davidson. Very happy to have you as part of this program. Myself, I'm Smriti, and this is Adi Narayanan. We had the good fortune of meeting you at IIT Delhi when we were hosting you as part of the Mind Meditation workshop. And it was such a pleasure listening to you. And we wanted the benefit of your wisdom to reach a larger audience that we are connected to through various programs. And we are so happy that you accepted this invitation and made yourself available to share your wisdom and experience with research. And our ashram is located near Paini in Tamil Nadu. And we also have a Gurukulam here, which is a traditional school that blends yoga, meditation, and the Indian health sciences and the Indian other sciences as well, including Ganita and Indian astronomy, together with the modern aspects. And
we believe that bringing in these sciences helps in establishing the deeper values, the humane values which are so very important. As the popular saying is like science is value neutral. Well, actually, it need not be so. So that's where we try to introduce it from the Indian perspective, so that values are central to the educational process, so that children grow up to be more humane, kind, compassionate, and in a way which is scientific.
And we are also doing a lot of programs based on the practice philosophy and the science of yoga. And we also hope to set up a small, probably a neuroscience lab or something like that at the ashram, so that people who come and meditate there can also understand what is going on inside this so-called black box as of now. And this, to briefly introduce this program, this is a program for people who are interested in education, transforming education through principles that come from deeper aspects of life. So we have educators, we have educational administrators, people interested in the educational process, the philosophy and psychology of education, which is called the Bodhi program. So it's been happening from July, and now the participants of the program are in the project phase where they are putting these learnings into practice. And we also have the larger audience here who are from diverse backgrounds. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and over to you.
Well, thank you so much. Really so appreciate the invitation, and also all you are doing to further these important values, and particularly in the sphere of education, which I think is so critically important. And I really appreciate all of you joining us today. And I'm happy to be here to share a little bit about our journey. And let me begin by situating the work we do. I'm a neuroscientist and a psychologist by training, and I began my career with a very simple question. And the question is, why is it that some people are more vulnerable to life's challenges, and why are others more resilient? And in the early part of my career, I focused a lot on the adversity side of this continuum. I studied the brain mechanisms that were associated with vulnerability to anxiety and to stress and depression. And in 1992, I first met His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And when I met His Holiness for the first time, he asked me, why can't I use the tools of modern neuroscience that we were using to study anxiety and depression and stress, and use those tools to study kindness and to study compassion? And that was the beginning of a very important shift in our work. And we began to orient much more toward the positive end of this continuum. And then a few years later, when I saw him again, he was much more direct. And this time he said, I want you to please take the practices from our tradition, turn them into a form that anybody would feel comfortable practicing. Investigate them with the tools of modern science. And if you find them to be valuable, disseminate them widely. And that I take to be my assignment for the remainder of my time on this planet. And that is why I'm here. That is why I do really everything I do. And so it is with that motivation that we started the Center for Healthy Minds here at the University of Wisconsin in the US. And we also started more recently a nonprofit organization called Healthy Minds innovations. And the mission of the nonprofit is to take the insights from the science and turn them into tools that can be used to both measure and cultivate well-being at scale. So that is what we do. And between our Center for Healthy Minds and Healthy Minds Innovations, we have about 100 people working together as part of this community. And it's really a privilege for me to be a part of this really wonderful community and organization. So let me say a few words now about where all of this came from, where the science came from, and particularly highlight some important developments in modern science that created the foundation that enable us and other scientists to do the work they're doing, because this is something that really is fundamental. So what are those milestones or insights, foundations for modern science? The first is the understanding of neuroplasticity. And I'm sure this is a word that many of you, I'm sure most of you have heard of, probably all of you. This is a term that simply refers to the idea that the brain is constantly being shaped. And in fact, neuroplasticity happens all the time. And most of the time, neuroplasticity is happening in a way of which we're not aware. We're being constantly bombarded with information that is shaping our brains all the time. And we typically have very little control over that information. And we often have only a dim awareness, if any, of the forces that are shaping our brains. And the invitation in all of this work is that we can actually take more responsibility for our own brain by training our mind. And the amazing finding that has been consistently demonstrated in our work and in the work of many other scientists now is that when we train our mind, our brain also changes. And this is kind of extraordinary. And it is the key foundation that enables this work to proceed, because it has given an important connection to one of the most important insights from modern neuroscience, which is the insight of neuroplasticity. The second important foundation is the equivalent of neuroplasticity in the realm of genomics. So we are all born with a sequence of base pairs which constitute our DNA. However, that sequence, for the most part, will not change for most people. But what will change is the extent to which any gene is turned on or turned off. We can think of genes having little volume controls that go from low to high. And that is very dynamically influenced by our environment, by our demeanor, by our emotions. And we know, just to give one of many examples like this, we know that the way in which a mother behaves toward her offspring will induce epigenetic changes in the offspring. So a mother who is loving and very nurturant will induce one set of epigenetic changes. And if an infant is unfortunate and born in an environment where the infant does not receive that kind of love and nurturing, it will induce another set of epigenetic changes. And those epigenetic changes regulate our brain chemistry, our brain anatomy, our brain function. They influence our behavior and experience, And those epigenetic changes can actually persist. And they can persist for the entire life of an individual. And they even can be passed from one generation to another. This really gives us, I think, some deep scientific insights into karma. This is really profound in terms of the new way of understanding this that has come from the study of how our genes are regulated, which is the science of epigenetics. The third important foundation in modern science upon which a lot of this is built is the increased understanding of how the mind and brain are connected to the body, and the understanding of the bidirectional influences between the body and the mind and the brain. So we know more about the pathways, the signaling systems through which our minds and brains influence our bodies, and through which our bodies can in turn modulate our mind and our brain. Our minds are embodied minds. And this body of ours plays a very important role in shaping our experience. And also our minds play a very important role in shaping our bodies. And so the reason why this is so important is we know from large-scale epidemiological research that people who report higher levels of well-being are actually physically healthier. Now, this is not true of everyone, but of course, but if you look at very large populations, hundreds of thousands of people, you see these associations. People consistently, scientists consistently show that in these large populations, individuals who report higher levels of well-being are indeed physically healthier. And this leads to the conjecture that if we train our mind and if we cultivate well-being, it will actually have a potential beneficial effect on our physical health. Now, it's not going to influence everything. It will not cure certain illnesses, but in general, again, looking at large populations, there is reason to believe this may be true. And so this is something really important because it suggests that when we cultivate well-being, we are influencing not simply psychological well-being, but also it gets under the skin, so to speak, and affects our bodies in ways that actually can promote physical health. And finally, the last element that I'd like to describe at the outset, a key insight in modern science, is one that is probably the most controversial among these, and yet there's a growing corpus of very serious scientific evidence in support of it. And the way that I like to frame it is that every human being comes into the world with innate basic goodness. Innate basic goodness. And what does that mean? It means that we come into the world with an innate preference for pro-social interactions. Another way to say it is that kindness is part of our biology. Kindness is part of our genome. Kindness is part of our true nature. And the reason why this is so important is because when we do practices to cultivate loving kindness and compassion, we're not creating them out of nowhere, but rather we're actually familiarizing ourselves with the basic nature of our own minds. This is what a human mind is. We think of kindness in the same way that other scientists think about language. We all know that every human being has the innate biological capacity for language. But in order for that capacity to be expressed, we need to be raised in a normal linguistic community. And we know from studies of feral children who are unfortunately raised in very adverse circumstances in the wild, they don't develop normal language. And kindness is something similar. We come into the world with the seeds for kindness, but they need to be nurtured. And there are practices that have evolved over thousands of years that can be used to nurture kindness. And it turns out that those practices have important effects on the brain and the body. And this is a topic of modern scientific investigation, really to showing that these ancient practices, which have been around for more than 2,500 years, actually change our brains and our bodies in very profound ways. So those are 4 key insights. And just to name them again, one is neuroplasticity, a second is epigenetics. The third is the increased understanding of the connections between the body and the mind and the brain. And the fourth is innate basic goodness. So those insights have been very important for us in formulating our research and enabling us to advance in this area. And we have developed a framework for understanding what we call the plasticity of well-being. And we've been led to a very simple conclusion, which we also think is very radical, and that is that well-being is a skill. It's actually a skill. It's a skill that's not fundamentally different in terms of how it's acquired.
How should I put it? Worried or concerned, or yeah. So there again.
Sorry, Richard, I think we'll just have to mute everyone. Yeah.
Okay.
Please continue.
So well-being is really best regarded as a skill, and we acquire it in ways that are similar to, for example, learning to play a musical instrument. If we practice, we will actually get better. And so what is this framework for the plasticity of well-being? The framework holds that there are 4 key pillars of well-being. The first pillar we call awareness. And awareness is where mindfulness would be. It also includes, which is part of mindfulness, it includes a capacity that is called meta-awareness by scientists. Meta-awareness is knowing what our minds are doing. Knowing what our minds are doing. And this may sound a little odd to some of you, and one way to help appreciate this concept is by reflecting on situations where we don't know what our mind is doing. And so what's an example of that? Well, one example is how many of you have had the experience of reading a book where you might be reading each word on a page, and you might be reading one page, another page, and after a few minutes, you realize that you have no idea what you've just read. Your mind is lost. It's somewhere else. Well, I think many people, and in fact, research shows that many people have had this kind of experience. And the moment we recognize that our mind is elsewhere, that's a moment of meta-awareness. It's a moment of awakening. And this is exactly what is trained in certain forms of mindfulness practice. And we know that it can be trained. We know that meta-awareness can be strengthened. And there are changes in the brain that accompany those changes in meta-awareness that we believe are important in allowing those changes to endure. So that, and when we meditate, we don't just put our butts on the cushion for the experience that we have when we're meditating, because after all, if that's all that happened, what would be the point? It would be like taking a drug, and when the drug wears off, you're back to your baseline. But that's not why we put our butts on the cushion. We do that because it has the potential of transforming every aspect of our lives, infusing every aspect of our lives with these qualities. And so this is, we believe, what the alterations in the brain enable by providing the foundation for the enduring changes that might occur. So the first pillar of this framework is awareness. The second pillar we call connection. And connection is about qualities that are important for healthy social relationships. Qualities like appreciation and gratitude and kindness and compassion. And research shows that all of those qualities can be trained. They can be cultivated. The third pillar of well-being we call insight. And insight is about understanding at a deep experiential level how our minds actually work, particularly around the construct that we call ourself, this narrative that we have about ourselves. Every human being has this narrative, has a narrative about who he or she is. And insight is about understanding how this narrative actually shapes how we experience the world. And we know that our beliefs, our expectations, our self-concept, if you will, filters the world and literally defines the world in which we live. And what a healthy mind is about is not so much changing the narrative, but it's changing our relationship to the narrative so that we can see the narrative for what it is. And that's something that can be trained as well. And there are many meditation strategies that have been developed in the Asian contemplative traditions that allow us to cultivate this kind of insight. And finally, the fourth pillar of well-being is purpose. And purpose is about understanding the direction in our life to sense where our life is headed, and also to connect our core values with what it is that we're doing. And here, it's not so much about finding something more purposeful to do, but rather how can we connect meaning and purpose to everything that we do? So that everything, literally everything that we do, including tasks that are routine, that we do every day, how can that be connected to our core values and our sense of purpose? So those are the four key pillars of the plasticity of well-being. And research shows that every one of those pillars can be trained, and they each play an important role in well-being. And one of the things that this framework helps us to appreciate is that while training on any one of these pillars is certainly beneficial, what we've seen in the West, and particularly in North America, I would say, is that as Dharma has been taught in the West, there is more of a privileging of certain of these pillars than others, particularly of mindfulness. Mindfulness is certainly very important, but it is one of several pillars of well-being. And in order to promote optimal human flourishing, we believe we need all of them. So this is something very important. And we also have the conviction that one size does not fit all. So it's very likely that people, in fact, we know this is the case, that people differ in where they have particular strengths and where they may need more training. And one of the important questions for modern scientific research is whether we can be more granular in helping a person to identify what particular practices may be most beneficial to that person, given where that person begins, given the starting place, if you will. And so this is something that we are doing quite a lot of research on these days. Let me just focus on a couple of other points, and then I'll stop so that we can have some discussion. I want to underscore the fact that the cultivation of well-being in this sense, we think of as an urgent public health need. Even before the pandemic, the trajectory that humanity was on, I think most people would agree, was not a particularly healthy or sustainable one. Rates of distractibility across the world have been increasing. Rates of loneliness. There's a paper which just recently was published that did an analysis of 207 countries throughout the world and looking at trends over time, and loneliness across the entire world is increasing. And loneliness, by the way, is greater than twofold a risk factor for mortality than is obesity. And so these are, again, are not simply subjective experiences, but they also are accompanied by changes in the body, which are consequential for our health. So this is really an urgent need. Depression is skyrocketing across the world. And there is a paper which was just published 2 weeks ago in the British medical journal Lancet, very important medical journal, comparing the rates of depression pre-COVID and during COVID across the entire world. In every country for which there is data, and this was an analysis of about 170 countries throughout the world. And in every single country for which there's data, rates of depression are higher during COVID compared to pre-COVID. And in many countries, these rates are more than 30% higher. I mean, it's astronomical how significant this change is. And we know from data from the World Health Organization that depression is now the leading cause of morbidity worldwide. And so these are very serious issues, and it's an urgent public health need. And we believe that the widespread cultivation of well-being can help prevent many of these serious problems upstream. And particularly if we can incorporate these practices into our educational systems so that we can train the next generation of our children to start off their life on a more positive trajectory. This is something that we believe will be enormously consequential. And one of the things that I frequently remind us of is that when human beings first evolved on this planet, none of us were brushing our teeth. And I'm sure every one of you brushes your teeth every day. This is something we do for our personal physical hygiene. It's not part of our genome. And I think most of you, probably all of you, would agree that our minds are even more important than our teeth. And yet most of the world doesn't take even as short a time as we take to brush our teeth to nourish our mind. And so we need to do everything we can in every possible way to incorporate these kinds of practices in our daily routine, because the very future of humanity depends on it. So let me stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions and engage in a dialogue, and I appreciate you listening.
That was really, very clear to all the participants. Taking it forward definitely means integrating it into the educational process. And that's where most of the participants, being educators of even networks of schools, can play a very important role, because as we all understand, and as Dr. Davidson has very clearly pointed out, mental health, especially depression, is a very important concern amongst young people, even as early as school children. So even pre-teenage children are now found to have symptoms of depression, and that's where this being a focus of education becomes very, very critical. So along these lines, what research can offer is one thing, but as Professor Davidson has pointed out, there are practical wisdom that are there embedded in our culture, in our traditions, that can be mined and offered in an appropriate manner, so that children and young people can see meaning and purpose to their lives. As they say, there are different kinds of poverty. One is poverty of food and so on. Another is poverty of love, affection, care, and so on. But amongst young people now, we clearly see a poverty of inspiration. Most people don't know why they need to wake up the next day. And that is a very critical thing to work upon. So that way, this has definitely been very eye-opening. And I invite questions from the...
Yeah, and thank you for your beautiful comments. I completely agree. And, this is also an area where His Holiness the Dalai Lama always reminds us that education is so critically important. And the change that I think we all seek, it needs to involve education in a major way. And so I very much appreciate the perspective that you shared.
Yes. And in fact, we do observe that, we have a small group of children going through a different mode of learning at our ashram. We do see that when we integrate these contemplative practices on a daily basis, they get to spend a good amount of time on yoga and meditation and contemplative on self-reflection as well. Within a short period of time, for about within 3 to 4 months, we observe a huge change in the way they look at the world, the confidence that they have about their body and their mind, and their ability to look at situations, analyze it, and intake it in a very objective, at the same time in a very connected perspective. So as you said, it really builds those connections. They don't see themselves very different from nature, from other beings around them. And this happens in a very short period of time. As you said, just like brushing their teeth, they all wake up and then they need to have their daily dose of meditation or yoga. And that inspires them throughout the day. And, thank you for sharing this message with all the educators here. I hope, some of them are able to integrate such practices on a daily basis.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Srishti
Srishti has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think the passion and the urgency for this was quite palpable in the way you spoke. Just in the interest of everyone who's here, right? Like you spoke about the 4 pillars, but could you give us maybe, one takeaway practice that can be implemented, right from now where we are, that all of us can take back, either for the kids or like for ourselves, that you've seen has worked well?
Certainly, and let me also, I'm happy to do that. And I want to underscore the fact that one of the things that the scientific research in this area teaches us is that one size does not fit all. I'm sometimes asked when I give large public talks, what's the best form of meditation that I should do? And I say, I'll tell you what the best form is. The best form of meditation to do is the form of meditation that you actually do. So I think that this is something important to emphasize. Given your question, I'm happy to share one kind of practice that we have found to be enormously helpful, particularly during the pandemic, and a practice that can be integrated so easily into our daily life is a practice around appreciation. Appreciation is one of the most unappreciated emotions in Western scientific research, but it's so important. So let me give you an example. We can actually do a little practice right now together. So let's please sit in an upright posture. You can keep your eyes open or closed, whichever is more comfortable. If your eyes are open, have a soft gaze. And whenever we begin a practice, it's helpful to reflect, even for a few moments, on our motivation for being here, for doing the practice. And see if you can find within yourself a motivation for practice that extends beyond yourself, recognizing that calming our minds and opening our hearts is beneficial not only for ourselves, but for all the beings that we touch directly or indirectly. And now let's bring into our mind and our heart a person. It could be more than one person. A person who has been helpful to you during this challenging time of the pandemic. Recognizing that we exist in a very connected way. Our lives are completely interdependent with those around us and with our environment. And as we bring this person into our mind and our heart, let's reflect on how they have been beneficial, helpful to us during this challenging time. And allow this sense of appreciation to emerge. Maybe even reflecting on how you would express your gratitude to that person the next time you see them. And as we end this very short period of practice, let's together dedicate whatever merit, whatever insight we may have gleaned from this practice, and reflect on how we can actually bring this out into the world, into our daily lives. To benefit not only ourselves, but to benefit all the other beings that we connect with. For those of you whose eyes have been closed, please open them. And this is the kind of very simple appreciation practice that we can do anytime, anywhere. One of the things that we find is around mealtime is a great opportunity to do appreciation practice. Every human being needs to eat to survive. And if we reflect on all of the people that contributed in one way or another to having food on our plate and express appreciation, it's a great opportunity to bring this several times a day into our lives. So this is an example of what we call micro interventions or micro practices. And we somebody has their mic on, so there's a lot of background noise. Maybe you can mute.
Abhijit, would you like to ask your question? Please.
Hi, Richard.
Hello.
It's a wonderful opportunity to interact with you. I've been trying to reach you for a very long time, and it was just accidental that I was in this course, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. And my question is around the framework that you discussed about human flourishing. Did the inspiration for the 4 pillars of the framework, did it come from any of the Buddhist texts? Because, there has been a linkage in what you have been doing. I'm just curious to know that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. And it's a great question. The inspiration is jointly a product of the contemplative insights as well as modern science, and looking at the intersection between them. Where is the sweet spot? Where is the overlap? But it has been deeply informed by Buddhism, there's no question. And in fact, we've had in the early stages of developing this framework, extensive conversations with His Holiness the Dalai Lama about the framework, and also several other well-known teachers, Dharma teachers. So yes, there's a lot of drawing on those traditions that have informed the framework.
Can you suggest some reading material? Because many of us do come from India, and we may have a possibility of reading the actual original text.
Yes, I would be happy to. Actually, in the scientific paper that we published on the framework, there are citations to the classical contemplative texts that have been important in formulating this framework. And I can put into the chat the reference for the scientific framework, and this paper is freely available. You can download it online. You can go to our website. And by the way, on our website, all of our scientific publications are freely available. And also our app, the Healthy Minds program, that is a training program for each of these 4 pillars of well-being, is also freely available throughout the world. You can get it in India. Unfortunately, it's only in English right now, but it is available. So you can download it wherever you get apps from.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'll follow up with you and we'll compile an email that we can send out to participants of all the research papers, books,
Perfect.
and any resource links. Thank you. So we have very short time now with Richard.
Can I ask a question, Vipul?
We have 3 hands raised already. Yeah, sorry. Nikhilji, can you keep it concise, please? And please raise your hand if you have a question.
Yeah, sure. So I'll keep it very short. Richard, I would love to know more about this term called the mind and how is it different from the brain? Yeah, just.
We need another few hours for that.
Okay.
So it's, certainly it's a wonderful and critical question. If you asked 99% of neuroscientists in the West that question, I think they would tell you that the mind is what the brain does. And in fact, if you go on to the website of the MIT's Department of Brain and Cognitive Science, which is one of the most well-known departments of its kind in the world, and there are some wonderful scientists. I have many friends in that department, but if you look at their website, it says that the mind is what the brain does. And my view is that for a bunch of smart people, that's really not so smart a statement. So I would say that we need to be agnostic about this from a scientific perspective. We need to have humility about this hard problem. The philosophers call it the hard problem. And the problem is, how is it if we believe that there is a material basis of mind, how does experience arise from this material basis? And I would say that we have not made any progress on this question in the last 100 years, 0. I think we would say that if we're really honest with ourselves. Now, I'm a very minority view on this. And if you asked a mainstream neuroscientist this question, I think you would get a very different answer. But I believe that the most honest response that we can give at this point in time, particularly a simple response, is we don't know.
Okay.
And I think that that's really the most honest response.
Thanks a lot, Richard. Thank you for this short but very enriching session. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Most welcome.
Thank you, Richie. Kalyanji, would you like to go, please? We'll just take last 2 questions.
Okay.
Oh, I think we lost him. Prashantji, would you like to go?
Yes. Thank you, Richard, for beautiful lecture, and you have very beautifully cleared all the doubts. But I also have that question, but I said about mind and brain.
It's very, very difficult for me to hear, to understand.
You are getting my voice now?
Now is better.
Yeah. I'm saying very much. Thank you very much for the beautiful session on a subject like this. Actually, I'm teaching similar subject, happiness studies, to the senior students here in engineering college at Lucknow. So my question was, I will ask directly because there is very little time. as you said about the problem is I'm having students of a different mindset, that too up to the number 80 at a time. So is there any micro practice like that they can do? And even if they are not having the awareness or the that much interest into that, because I want to just let them have the very little essence of that lecture, so that they can get connected. As you said, like they must be,
I'm sorry, but I couldn't understand the key point of the question. I couldn't hear well.
Again, you are able to hear me? Actually, I'm having.
Prashantji, would you like to close your video and then speak?
Okay. Surely. Just a minute. Yes, Rishabh. So now you're getting my voice?
Yeah, and maybe I'll just quickly check with you, Prashantji. Was the question about a micro practice for your students around happiness?
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to know about micro practice that can be implemented for a group of students who are having a different mindset, all together. Some are there for the degree only, some are there for understanding something, some are there for my class only. I have to teach all the students. And I know, being a teacher, being, as sir said, the study of happiness, study of well-being is important for all. But how to bring this into attention to the students?
So I think that a simple micro practice. Yeah, thank you for this. A simple micro practice for this is to invite the students to notice something positive about every person they meet during the day. And their assignment is to notice something positive about them. And, we are, as human beings, our minds are attracted to discrepancy and to surprise. This is, our minds are built to notice this. And so we tend to notice things that are negative because they're less frequent. And we habituate to positive. And so training our mind to notice what's positive can be enormously helpful. When I was a student, I was taught to look at people and try to notice what's wrong with them. And now when I look at people, I try to notice what's right with them. It's just flipping the switch. Once you become more familiar with doing that, it's actually becomes very easy to do. And it can totally change your demeanor.
Yeah. So similarly, I would in a minute I will share something. Yeah. What happened when some students, they made some some mistake, and both of them, they came to me, and being a proctor, so I had to give the solution. I just simply asked the one who did some fighting with the other one. I said, do you know what are the good things he is having? He said, yes, I know everything. I know what are bad things he is having. I said, okay, not about bad, only good thing you tell. So he was unable to tell 2 or 3 good habits or 2 or 3 good things. So yes, and then onwards, I said, this is assignment for both of you. Now you have to bring 10 good points about him and 10 good points about another one. You both have to do this assignment. And similarly, they did. After 2 or 3 days, they came to me and they said, sir, we are working on the assignment, but it's not that easy. But yes, it was.
Yes. Prashantji? Prashantji, sorry
Thank
to
you.
interrupt. We are also losing your voice, and we have almost reached the end of the session. But thank you so much for sharing and for your question. I invite.
Yeah. I want to thank you, people at Anadi also. I never met Anadi people, but yes, they shared this link, and I'm able to join this workshop. So thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you to all of you.
Yes, so thank you. I invite Smriti for the closing and prayer.
Thank you, Dr. Davidson, for this wonderful session, and thank you all for participating in this session. And thank you to the audience that are participating live through other social media handles as well. We hope to connect with you and take your guidance on some research aspects that we are working on at the ashram. especially in the interjection of yoga, neuroscience, education, and how it can benefit humanity and the society that we are working with.
Yeah, because the research that you have been doing is at a very critical, a very critical point where it needs to reach humanity. And, this is of very practical concern. And, the deadline for it to reach humanity was yesterday. It's already gone by. So definitely,
Yes,
these are very important takeaways for everybody participating here. The reason why we are doing these programs is not just for information or just getting to know these areas, exploration, and so on, but on a very practical count, because we definitely see there is human suffering, and however much we can participate in this is called Loka Sangraha. When we participate in others, relieving others' sufferings, that makes for a great life.
Absolutely.
So
exactly.
that is called a Mahatma, and that is where we see Dr. Richard Davidson's work. We consider him a great person, and we definitely see all of us to be along those lines where we can make our lives great by being a participant in relieving human suffering. So
we'll end
wonderful.
With
thank you so much.
We'll end with an invocation. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would just like to thank Richard and also Nadi Foundation. Planning for this session went for almost 6 months. Richard's schedule is super packed, but thank you so much for sharing your powerful insights and sparing your precious time with us. We will definitely follow up and take them forward, share them more widely with the course participants and beyond. Yeah, and hope for longer.
Wonderful. And thank you for all you are doing to benefit humanity. Deeply appreciated. Bye-bye. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.